Ready, set, secure.
Hello everybody, how you doing? Michael Farnham here, CTO with SET Solutions. Joining me, Stephen Alexander, who is our GRC practice manager, correct?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be talking today about standards, not implementation, more about standards assessments, gap assessments, that kind of thing. Stephen and I both have healthcare backgrounds. We've both gone through all of the HIPAA stuff back in the day from our healthcare days, all around HIPAA, and then HITRUST, which had a little bit more teeth. Now, obviously, today we've got a lot of customers that are in the energy sector and the critical infrastructure, that kind of thing. So if you're one of those customers, you know you're dealing with some of that same pain of the regulations coming down from DHS and TSA under them. So we thought we would get together and kind of talk about what Stephen does when he starts to go to you as a customer and you've come to us and say, I want to do an assessment towards a specific standard or regulation, whatever that may be. That could be anything from, like we said, HIPAA. That could be anything from like PCI, if you just want to do an assessment against ISO 27001 standards or whatever those standards are. Stephen is going to kind of talk about how he approaches that. So Stephen, why don't you kind of start?
Sure.
Maybe what do you do when a customer comes to you and says, we want to assess against a certain standard? What starts going through your brain?
Well, it depends a lot on the customer and it depends a lot on the standard. So with the customer, it depends on the industry, and that means what their customers look like, what kind of regulations they're under, basically the requirements that they're looking at, and again, it goes to the standard or set of controls that they're looking to get assessed against. So, for example, if it's ISO 27001, that means that, for example, the customer is going to probably look to get certified. So the bar is probably a lot higher in terms of compliance with that standard versus just getting to a level of maturity like you might do with, say, just the NIST CSF. So the gap findings would potentially be a lot more stringent in that case. So as far as the approach I would take, my initial approach is to assess those factors and kind of figure out where they stand in terms of their customers and in terms of what they're trying to achieve out of the deal.
So does it matter when, after you kind of do that initial assessment of the customer from a size and regulation or standard that they're coming to us, does it matter then what kind of size the customer is, maybe, or what their maturity is? Do you have to kind of assess them at that point before you can even get in there and start doing the assessment for them?
Yeah, it does make a big difference. So with size, it can matter because smaller companies tend to have less of a maturity level, or if they have a higher maturity level, their implementation is going to be different than a larger organization. It also depends on their stance with regard to technology. So if they're cloud first versus on-prem first, that's going to make a difference in what the control implementations look like. So from the perspective of size and type of implementation, that's going to make a big difference, yeah.
So now you know what kind of standard they're going after, you know what their maturity level is, you know what their size is, and size will have something to do with this a little bit, I guess, but once you've gotten to that point, and maybe you've put down the regulation in some type of document that they can answer, like a questionnaire or something like that, do you tend to start with management? Do you have them start figuring out together who all they need to gather in the room? Do you start kind of light and then get heavier? What's your typical process there?
Yeah, so that depends again on the organization, but my general approach will usually be to approach whoever we've contracted with, and that's usually a CISO or somebody in a similar position, right? And kind of figure out what their organization looks like and determine from there who manages what and who I need to talk to answer what questions, essentially. So a lot of the higher level questions are going to be like, oh, okay, what's your policy to cover this control or that control, and to gather the documentation and as much documentation as we can gather, and then assess from there what the next steps are. So that's usually an organic process, but that is generally the first step, is to identify the policies and procedures that drive the security processes.
Okay. So a lot of the documentation, you're gathering that stuff, then is, and it's not necessarily, I think auditors do this a lot, but are you looking for proof of that these things are implemented in a certain way, or are you kind of taking their word that these policies and processes and procedures and stuff are in place?
It really depends, again, on what the customer is trying to get out of the engagement, right? So if it's a 27001 engagement, we're obviously working for the customer. We're trying to achieve their goals. In the case of a 27001 assessment, they're ultimately trying to get certified, right? So for something like that, yes, I will hold them to a higher bar, because if they want to get certified, they will need to provide the auditor with more than just a statement that yes, we're doing that. They will need to provide evidence. So if I'm assessing against 27001 or another certification standard, then I will definitely ask for specific evidence and get that in the record, because it's kind of what is going to be needed by an actual auditor. In the case of something like a NIST CSF assessment, that's usually to get to a level of maturity. So the point there for the customer is usually going to be they need to think about all the controls and make sure that they've addressed them all. So in a case like that, yeah, it's kind of up to the customer, and we'll negotiate it and determine, hey, how do we want to play this? Do we want to just go through the questions and make sure that yes, you think you have this covered, and yeah, that's fine with me. It's really up to what the customer needs and wants.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me today and talking about this. For anybody out there who is looking at doing any kind of gap assessment, it's typically what we're doing, right? We're not doing the auditing and certifying for anyone. We're trying to do gap assessments for you to get you ready for that. And to Stephen's point, if it's a maturity thing, we're getting you kind of that knowledge that you know what gaps you need to fill. Please let us know. Stephen's got a team. He's leading that team. We can assess against just about anything, and as long as we're not, it's not something crazy out there.
As long as it can be interpreted, we can.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you've got internal standards, I mean, that's one
true,
thing
absolutely.
that some people don't think about. You've got an internal standard that your company has built that shows a level of maturity that you're trying to go. We can take that and assess it for you. Maybe you need a third party to do that. Correct?
Right, absolutely. For example, you might want to assess your procedures against your policy to make sure they line up, and you might want to do a work study to make sure that the people are following the actual procedures, for example.
So don't just think about it as being a regulation or a standard that you have to meet, that a governmental body or something like that's put in. You want to do other measurements. We can do this at a granular level, or we can do it at a high level as well.
Correct. Yep.
So reach out to us on our website, on our contact form. We'll have a link in this video that you can go do that. Reach out to your account manager and let us know. We can help you out. Thank you very much, everybody.